Hello, this is Dan Shea with Veterans for Peace Forum. We're starting another great program today, and we have with us today a photographer, veteran, Navy veteran, Joe Cantrell. And did I pronounce it right?
Yeah, it's close.
Is it close?
I've been called worse.
Well, tell me how it's pronounced.
Cantrell.
Cantrell, okay. I remember there was in the old Western movies, Cantrell was one of the Southern...
Yeah, Quantrill.
Quantrill,
yeah.
This has been an incredible period in our time. Recently, we just had two young men who were killed while trying to help somebody against a white supremacist who was screaming racist epithets at some Muslim women, and he stabbed him in the throat and killed two of the people that were helping and injured a third. I just wanted to pull up here, and we want to, at least do a presente for these people. One of the max victims is an employee, Army veteran, Rick Best, 53, as a supervisor for the City Bureau of Development Services. He had children, 4 children, I believe. And then there was Asha Deliverance. They added the photo, I'm sorry. It's, I can't even tell it. What's his name here? I guess it is Asha. Deliverance was a Reed College student, was one of the people that was stabbed. We want to do presente for both of those young gentlemen, and whoever is in the hospital, which I don't know, probably being kept secret right now. We want to hope and best for that person to get well rapidly and back into our society. One of the things that are happening with this, these white supremacists, is that they want to create fear. This is exactly what they want to do. And what we need to do is say, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. We have to continue to go on our path. People have been walking a path towards peace for a long time. People have been coming together. I think, people all over the world have been trying to rejoin the circle of humanity. And one of the problems is that as we were beginning to just break through on some of these things, back in the 80s I was involved with Black Studies and with Chicano Studies program, and now you're seeing all across the country this turning away from these things. In Arizona they're trying to get rid of the programs. State after state is trying to remove books from the libraries that tell the true history of people that have suffered under the victims of colonialism in this country and around the world. So we need to, just as we're doing that, it's like they pulled the rug out from underneath you and they're trying to turn the hard right. And we need to stay on the path to love and solidarity with each other. And so that's part of, the mission of Veterans for Peace. Veterans for Peace is an organization. We have about 130 chapters around the United States and those that are also in the world. We have a chapter in Okinawa, just last December started up, and we have, of course, Vietnam. We have London, UK chapter, and we have an Irish chapter, and we have a deported veterans chapter down in New Mexico. And just recently, which will just be being announced here shortly, this month in Japan, we have a chapter of Japanese Veterans for Peace. So it's an extraordinary thing that's starting to happen, and veterans are speaking out against the cruelty of war, the injustice not only in the wars that they experienced, but because of that experience they realize that, that they were lied to about why we go to war. And once you've seen people face to face, learned about the history of somebody else, it's hard to turn your gun on that person because they're your brothers and sisters. And when we can begin to see that, we can start to turn or keep on the path of love rather than turn in any direction. Let's keep moving forward. This is going to be Memorial Weekend. On Monday is Memorial Day. Here in Portland, Veterans for Peace is going to be up at the I believe it's going to be up at the Vietnam Memorial. They're going to meet there sometime around 10 a.m. and people are just going to be there. Veterans for Peace is just going to be there silently with their flags of peace and you know, saying that obviously just the sign itself says we are for peace. It's about time we stop glorifying war. No more monuments to the dead. Let's stop killing people and let's stop bringing these bodies home by not sending them in the first place. The other is that we'll also be I'm going to be leaving shortly and going to D.C. We have Vietnam Full Disclosure is doing what we call Letters to the Wall. So we're going to be there commemorating the Vietnam veterans and people from all over, veterans, not just from Veterans for Peace, but veterans from all over and family members are sending letters in, and then we hand those over to the wall in sort of a very respectful, solid solidarity message that, you know, we care about the loved ones, we care about the people who lost their lives there, and we don't want to see more people do that. But their own stories of how the war affects them, even if you didn't serve in that country, it affects the parents, the families. Their children are orphaned by war. Spouses lose their spouse. These affect people over and over again, and then those that aren't even on the wall. Just recently, I was just telling Joe here that I had a friend of mine who was with me in the Philippines, and we were great friends. I always knew him by Frank Garcia, and Frank and I were, you know, planning to do things together once we got out of the military. He was going to get married just before he got orders to go back to Vietnam, and about a month later, we heard that he had been killed. And it just devastated me. I just couldn't even begin to operate anymore. At that time, they didn't know what post-traumatic stress was. They didn't have a name for it. I just kind of refused to cooperate anymore. I didn't know how to cooperate. I didn't know what was going on in me. But I still, for 48 years, I've been looking for his name, and I couldn't find it because I always knew him as Frank Garcia. And then I see these names on the wall, and where, you know, they just said when that person died and what they served, but I didn't see whether they served in Subic Bay or not, where I was in the Marines. And just recently, after 48 years, I just found two people that it might be. And one of the things that I wanted to pull this out here. One of the things that affected me there was is that when I saw the two names, one name was Jose Garcia, and there was a photo that wasn't there the last time I had looked, maybe a couple years ago, and this photo looked exactly like my friend, so I'm pretty sure it was him. But I wrote this poem, which is going to be at the wall, so I want to read it to you. Is it really you? Is it really you, Frank Garcia? Is it really you? It has been 48 years since I saw your smile, heard your infectious laugh. Best buddies we were, Marines serving in Sepguard, Subic Bay. You were up when I was down, making the Philippines endurable. Some Filipino beauty was to be your bride, but orders came stamped, Vietnam. I heard you were killed, and my life went to shit. Excuse me. And I could not bear the thought of you being no more. F it. Because became my attitude. I refused to go orders to go on post. The military seemed so senseless, numbering my days, 30 days in the brig. I looked for you, for your name etched in that black granite wall. Now, after 48 years, I found two names that might be you. One was Arnold Falcon Garcia, and one was Jose Garcia Jr. A picture posted of Jose most reminds me of you. Is it you, Frank Garcia? Is it really you? The smile says it is. Miss you, buddy. So, you can tell you, these days, Memorial Day, really affects me. It affects a lot of us veterans So be respectful of veterans this weekend. It's really hard for me to talk about it sometimes, but I just wanted to share that with you because, like I said, I just found his name, and that picture really brought it home to me. There's going to be also coming up, I just want to make some announcements here, Vietnam War Memorial, a conversation with Ken Burns and Lynn Novak is going to be starting on OPB July 24th at 7:30 p.m. at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. They're inviting people for an evening with the filmmaker Ken Burns and Lynn Novak for a preview of the Vietnam War. This is a special event which features highlights from a 10-part, 18-hour documentary series, followed by a discussion with Burns, Novak, and Air Force Chief of Staff and retired four-star General Merrill McPeak. Now, full disclosure, Vietnam full disclosure, we knew about this coming up and we had tried to have some input on it, and we've had some difficulty with it. Now we're sure that Ken Burns is going to do a great job, but there's so much that's left out, so that we are actually looking at doing a follow-up review online, and we'll be posting those things, those letters, as if they're showing these clips, these documentaries from time to time. We'll follow the series, and we'll give you our personal views on how we saw the film, what was missing in the film, and to try and broaden the discussion, because there was a whole anti-war movement, there was a whole GI resistance movement that people aren't aware of, and we wanted to carry that on. So if you want to find out more about that, you should check out Veterans for Peace. .org, our website, and full disclosure, VietnamFullDisclosure.org. Those two areas you can always pull up and find out more information. If you have any problem, just call the national office and they can put you in touch with the website that you need to check into. So just as we're starting this, I have a great opportunity, I think, in introducing Joe. Joe has been a photographer, Cherokee Nation. He's been shooting and processing large format photography since the age of 14. And after 2 years tours in Vietnam and Cambodia as a naval diving officer, he stayed in Asia for another 15 years as a photojournalist, living like an urban peasant among the people who spoke little English, teaching himself to think through the cameras. And that's why I call this War and Peace through the lens of a camera. And so, Joe, you tell us a little bit more about where you grew up and why you joined the service in the beginning.
I grew up in Cherokee County, Oklahoma, and joined the military because that was what the men in my family did for the most part. My grandfather had been in the First World War. My father and uncles, all but one, had been in the military in the Second World War. And so when I heard that the nation needed me, having watched shows like Navy Log and John Wayne movies and that propaganda all my life, I wanted to go. So I joined the Navy and went into flight training and didn't make it there because my eyes were bad. So I went to a destroyer and I asked for a destroyer, small warship, going to Vietnam, and they were only too happy to give me that.
And that was about what year?
That was 68.
68, okay.
And shortly thereafter, we got orders to sail to Vietnam. And from Mayport, Florida, we went through the Panama Canal and then across the Pacific and did 9 months of destroyer duties there, which involved firing our guns at targets ashore and following aircraft carriers in case a plane crashed off of them, and assorted other tasks that little expendable ships were good for.
So, how'd you get started in photography? What was your first camera?
My first camera was a Kodak, a Brownie Hawkeye. My first real camera, when they called me, the school counselor just called me to her office one day and told me to go down to the dark room. They needed a photographer, so I was drafted as the high school photographer as a sophomore when I was 14, and continued that for all 3 years I was in high school. And when I graduated from high school, went to college, that photography instructor got hired by the same college, so all of a sudden I was the college photographer too, and kept that up most of the time through college. Became proficient, and that was almost all with speed graphics, the old 4x5 press cameras. And but I learned to use a 35 millimeter and smaller format cameras, and discovered art and self-expression. So I carried that tool in my head when I went into the military, and found it was very beneficial for trying to understand things where written or spoken explanations had proven false. That was certainly the case in Vietnam. Our first night in the theater there, we ran over a sampan, a fishing sampan, driving, sailing very fast through coastal fishing waters. It was completely regardless of life. And I saw these, we ran over the boat, and I saw this old woman and a couple of kids go flying off into the ocean, and I thought, wait a second, this is not, that we're supposed to be here to help these people, and here we are running over them so we can get down the coast and fire the guns to kill somebody else. It just didn't jibe with me, and particularly after the captain of the ship joked about it. So got through that tour and came back to the States, and the same people who had been pushing the war before I went were still pushing it, and I thought, well, either I didn't see what I thought I saw, or they don't know what's happening, or they're lying.
Right.
And I had to know the difference, so I went to Navy deep sea diving school, and to use I built up skills as a diver in the Oklahoma lakes and rivers. Thought that would be good in the Mekong Delta. I qualified to 1,000 feet, but the Mekong River's not nearly that deep. And was sent to Harbor Clearance Unit 1, which is based in Subic Bay, and rotated in and out of Vietnam. And that time, I learned on Wednesday that on Saturday I was going into Vietnam, and when I got to Vietnam, I found out I was going up the river somewhere, and went over a series of helicopters and boats and people wait, and we'd land. I was a lieutenant, junior grade, but I was carrying orders that would allow me to bump a full colonel if I needed a seat on a helicopter. And I didn't know what I was doing. And finally we landed on a ship in the Mekong River, and there were 2 swift boats waiting for me there. And they said, yes sir, just hop aboard. And we went up the river and around behind an island, and there was one of our salvage craft moored over a wreck, and I stepped aboard, and I was the senior officer in charge of an ongoing combat salvage operation. And I didn't even realize I was in Cambodia. They hadn't even told us that, hadn't told me that. I had had no specific combat training, nothing, none of that stuff. I was a diving officer. But there we were. So anyhow, we managed to pull it off. And
Do you want to tell people a little bit why that being in Cambodia we weren't supposed to be there?
oh, by that time we were. It was known that we were there.
Okay.
We had acknowledged it.
Yeah.
Of course, we had been in Cambodia and been bombing Cambodia for a long time. That was ostensibly secret, but the only people who it was secret from were the American people who believed the news that came out of Washington. The Cambodians certainly knew. I mean, if you've got B-52s dropping bombs in your neighborhood, you know about it.
Right.
Everybody else in the world knew about it. The French knew about it when I went there later. They said, why? How did you call this a secret? I didn't call it a secret. It was, but we got out of there. There was hell to pay back here and domestic resistance to that. I understand. And so we came back out of Cambodia. That was when I discovered that I'd been in it.
Yeah.
And
now, were you photographing while you were there?
No.
Not at that time.
no, I tried to use my cameras while I was in Vietnam, but my mind, I was skipper of a boat
Right.
with 35 men on it at age 24, and I felt that responsibility very acutely.
Yeah.
So the artistic side of my mind was shut down hard.
And I regretted that, that I didn't have a camera with me, so I never had any shots, photos of friends and people there, which I wished I had, And I didn't even carry a camera when I was in the Philippines, It was, my mind wasn't there.
That's okay, I did. But it was a salvage operation, particularly a combat salvage operation, is quite a ticklish thing. And I needed 175% of my attention on high alert because there are many things on deck and underwater that can hurt my people.
Right.
And many ways to destroy equipment or, cause some kind of a catastrophic accident. And then there's the fact that people are taking shots at you from time to time. And our craft were not combat craft. Mine was, it was a Mike 8, an LCM 8, which was one of the boats they built in World War II to land troops. So you go into the beach and the ramp would fall down. And this was one of the big ones that had been made to land tanks. And they cut it in half and stretched it 20 feet and added a bunch of salvage equipment and generators, big beach gear and anchors and a A-frame over the bow. And in its sea trials, when it was brand new, running the best it ever ran in its life, it went 7 knots. We were sometimes in 14-knot currents. So I could be going all ahead flank as fast as it would go and moving backwards at about 9 miles an hour. Not the sort of thing you envision watching Navy log. But I got my people out of there. I'll always be happy about that.
You didn't lose anybody?
No.
That's great.
I mean, I lost some people to injuries, but everybody survived, and I still, to this day, fear having to write a letter home to parents.
Oh God, yeah.
That I was just terrified of that, and I'm so thankful I didn't have to.
I couldn't imagine having to do that.
It was, you know, the Navy diving stories. The Mekong River has these crayfish in it
Right.
that their bodies are about this long, but with their
Tail.
their antenna.
Oh,
I mean,
antenna.
not
Oh,
antenna,
yeah, yeah,
their
yeah.
claws.
Yeah, yeah.
Their claws. They're about this long, and they crawl around on you all the time while you were underwater. I guess trying to decide whether you were ready to eat or not. And yeah, it was it was a couple of years after I came back before I could face the lobster tank in Safeway. But
Well, there too, the Mekong Delta, Agent Orange had been sprayed all throughout that area.
Yeah.
The mango trees had been pretty much devastated.
Everything hit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you guys were swimming in that stuff.
Yep.
I was up in Quang Tri, and during my time there at 68, heavily sprayed area, and I am an Agent Orange survivor. But
Yeah.
so, have you had any illnesses or anything related to Agent Orange?
I have not that I know of. My daughter, however, is named after a close friend who was in my diving unit, Dan Johnstone, and her name is Danielle, and he died of disease that is one of the ones traceable to Agent Orange.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
People should know about that. I mean, it's just we're still trying to get recognition for a lot of things for male veterans, where female veterans actually get a number of things noticed, but they've been trying to deny a lot of other than spina bifida. You know.
Yeah.
But it's something that people should know. You were swimming around it. We were sprayed. One of the things I noticed, and you can talk about it too, is that when I was in Vietnam, the jungle was quiet. It was silent, not just because of the guns and stuff, but also because they sprayed and killed so much of the wildlife.
Yeah.
But when I was in the Philippines, that jungle was alive. I mean, it sung. It was a symphony of noise, and I was beautiful. I mean, I found it very beautiful, you know.
Yeah.
So there was a difference between that, and you could see that it was a very stark difference what happened and what war does to the environment.
Well, yeah, I had my grandfather had a subscription to Field and Stream, or Sports Afield. He alternated years on them. And I'd read a story in the mid-50s about hunting in the Mekong Delta, and at that time, you know, hunting was another part of our culture that I've long since forsaken, but I thought that place, those pictures looked so beautiful. I could not wait to get there and see those huge mangroves, and there weren't any. There was, they'd all been removed, and Admiral Zumwalt, who lost his son, perhaps to Agent Orange, to the after effects, he wondered openly about the question, is it better to have done that and cleared the riverbanks of heavy foliage that people could hide behind and shoot at the boats on the river, or was it better to leave them there and sacrifice more of us? As it was, as you know we would,
Yeah.
we sacrificed Vietnam and the Vietnamese, and they're
right.
still suffering
That's right.
from it, and they will certainly beyond our lifetimes.
Generations to
Yeah,
come.
yeah. So, I mean, the answer, of course, was not to have invested in such a corrupt, dishonest enterprise as that war, and I don't think we would have, nor would we have spend so much time and capital, human and otherwise, on more recent wars, except that there is just tremendous profit in it for influential people.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what that's Smedley Butler would say.
Exactly.
If you take the profit out of war, you would probably end it.
Yeah.
To me, that's what that's usually what I talk to people about, and I mean, wars existed before the economy we have nowadays, but it just seems to exacerbate because everything is about profit before people, and there's a whole military-industrial complex that, I mean, they want war in order to sell weapons to be used over and over. The recent, I just did an event April 4th for Martin Luther King's Beyond Vietnam speech, and then 2 days later, Trump fires off Tommy Hawk missiles into Syria,
Yeah.
and then a day after that, the so-called Moab, I don't even want to call it by what they're calling it, one of the largest bombs, non-nuclear bombs ever exploded dropped in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And why? I mean, because they have it and they need to use it, and they make another one. I mean, I have so much problems thinking about this. I watched a movie recently called War Dogs. I don't know, have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
You probably wouldn't want to see it, but it's more modern. Jonah Hill, and I forget the other actor. It's a true story about two young arms sale, like 17, 18 years old and 19, 20. They got these government contracts and started selling weapons, but they talked about, you think the war is about ma, pa, and apple pie and the flag and patriotism? I see it. He started counting how much a helmet costs, how much this costs, and he saw it as profit.
Yeah, Dan Johnstone, my friend, and I figured roughly that our standard firefight, the boat had 4 50 calibers on it and a couple of M60s, and the rest were M79s and M16, stuff like that. And we figured that the average firefight cost about $140,000. Well, where did that money go? It went to somebody. Somebody made a profit off of it.
That's right.
And it certainly wasn't us, and it wasn't the Vietnamese. Well, and also, as we came out of Cambodia, I had this epiphany of realizing that what we Americans are doing there was what had happened to us Cherokees in this country and to the rest of the indigenous tribes, except this time we were the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I'd always thought I wanted to be a naval officer, but that deflated it right there. And I saw all sorts of waste, and it was routine.
Right.
And I talked to a guy who'd been a first-class petty officer working there in a power station. He got out of the Navy, was rehired by the private company that ran that power station, and went from making less than $1,000 a month to making $600 a day, if what he told me was true. Mm-hmm. But I think it probably was. So this obscene profit, that people are making, we're not making it.
No.
We're paying.
But there's a whole industry of people that jobs are connected to it.
Yeah.
So they've got their tentacles and everything. So if you're working for a company that's producing weapons for these wars or
Yeah.
or whatever, then there's a company contracted to do this and a company contracted to do that. And so when you go to the Senate and the Congress to vote on these issues, they have people back home, what are you going to do? I'm going to lose my job. The big question is how do we turn these weapons into plowshares again, the old saying, let's turn them into plowshares. How do we create a new economy? And I think we can. I believe we can. I have to believe we can. After World War II, I mean, they used to, your auto companies were making tanks and all kinds of things. And when that ended, they had to turn back around. And they did learn to retool. And we could do that.
Yeah.
I think we can. Environmental, solar energy, get away from fossil fuels, all kinds of opportunities for people. And I think, we have to also look at the technology we have today. So these are possibilities, and I hope and pray that we can turn that around. Again, like I said, walk that path. Let's start moving that path forward. I want to talk a little bit about your photography here. And so I want to...
Well, you mentioned the life in the Philippine jungle, and I mentioned not being able to use my cameras while I was in Vietnam. I'd pick them up, and that part of me was just dead.
Yeah.
But when I came out to Subic Bay in late that year, that was the first picture I was able to take.
Okay.
That's a dragonfly on a piece of bamboo in the Philippine jungle, exactly the one that you were talking about.
Right.
And I thought that was kind of neat for the first attempt after I got out. In I believe it was 1984. During the 15 or 16 years I've spent in Asia as a photojournalist, I almost never came out, and then only for short visits. But I believe it was 1984 we went to D.C. and went to the Vietnam Wall, and happened to arrive on the day when they were installing the figures called Returning from Patrol. It was just sheer coincidence. This is the Vietnam Wall back behind here.
There. Okay.
Yeah.
Which I'll be going to see here shortly.
Yeah. And those are the figures. It was,
Is that the camera you took it with? Is that the...
No, I shot that with a Canon. That one's a Nikon.
Okay.
I remember the camera, the lens, the filter I had on it, the film I used, everything, but it was 4 years after I shot that picture before I could print it.
You did your own development and stuff too?
Yeah, I was, I don't want other people doing my development if I can help
I don't blame you.
Yeah. During the time I was shooting, first I shot for UPI and then started for Time and Newsweek and the New York Times and LA Times. And there was a group in the Philippines called the Lost Command. And that was based on one of those Telly Savalas movies where they had taken a bunch of sociopath American soldiers and put them together in a unit and sent them on a suicide. Well, the Philippines had done that, and I'm not sure why she was in that unit, but that was Commander Delilah, and she was the commander of a gold mining camp out in the Philippine jungle down in Mindanao. And we visited, and I made that picture, and it ran in Newsweek, and the next day the sky was full of photojournalists parachuting in. We call them parachute journalists, to try to get in there and get more pictures, but they let me, and the Colonel Latimora, the head of the Lost Command had let me in because I was a veteran. Nobody else got in there.
You want to turn that a little bit? They can see that.
Yeah,
There you go.
Glare.
There you go.
Yeah.
Now you can see that much better.
There we go.
A beautiful photo.
Yeah. Yeah, she was fun.
That's good.
Wonder whatever happened to her.
You know, I met, when I'm going back to Vietnam, I had met women that had served in the Vietnamese Army. You know?
Yeah. I met a woman in southeast Portland
Yeah?
in a Vietnamese restaurant who said she was a vet, and you know, our eyes sort of locked and hers went a mile deep, and I realized she'd been VC.
Yeah.
And she said she had spent years just spending her days in tunnels.
Yeah, Cu Chi. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cu Chi tunnels.
Yeah. This was among the people I lived among in Manila. That was little Tony, and that's a toy gun, but there we
There
go.
you go.
Oops.
You had it, yeah.
There. Tony was malnourished, and his parents were both malnourished. And so one of my projects was keeping him, getting them enough food to stay alive and stay moderately healthy. He used to get some really ugly secondary effects from his malnutrition. But he did have that toy gun, and he had that look, and I just thought, my goodness, this is a picture that's going to live on for a while. Bless his heart. Who knows where he is now? Put this down there. This one is another image that
Yeah, you're okay.
that sort of exemplifies the way I felt in those years, feeling that the country, my country, had turned its back on us and betrayed us, and some people say that every photograph you make is a self-portrait. Mainly I say it, but I think they all are in some respect. Mm-hmm. And this person was at a religious procession in the middle of downtown Manila in Quiapo district, which is outside the large cathedral. And I made this picture with that Leica sitting there. And he had, or she, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but he had brought in a T-shirt, and you'd take it off, and for 25 centavos you could get Jesus stenciled on it. So he has Jesus stenciled over a lumber supply or something. Mm-hmm. And then his, there we go, it's a little better. The lantern he has in his hand is made out of a Hope cigarette carton, which I thought was also ironic.
Oh, okay.
And I'll bite every time on irony.
Yes.
And that was a quarter-second exposure. I remember that one too. 46 years later. This fellow here was another member of the Lost Command. He was a bodyguard for Colonel Lattimore. He was kind of funny. We showed up down in this town where Colonel Lattimore, we believed he stayed, and heard that the colonel was across the street playing mahjong. So we went over there in the middle of the night, And this guy was sitting there, and he said, "Hey, Joe, take my picture." And I said, "No," smiling. And he said, "Why not?" And I said in Tagalog, "Because you're ugly." And he pulled that 45 out of his waist and waved it a couple of times across my face. And I said, "Yes, sir, just let me get a better lens and I'll be right back." So I did. I ran across the street and got a different lens and made this picture of him.
Not so ugly, but just the ugliness of the
It's
gun.
It's humanity, man.
Yes. Yes.
The people of the Philippines, the quote unquote little people, they are not little people. They are magnificent human beings, like the Vietnamese
Yes.
had been.
Yeah.
Taught me so much. This was the produce section of our grocery, which is to say they brought in some greens or whatever they had to sell, gulay is.
Wow.
And they would set up every evening and with buckets and putting things on the ground in front of them, and we'd go down there and buy it and take it home and eat it. And their sense of humor was so bright, especially after, my sense of humor had suffered considerable damage. And there was on the wall and back of them, the cracks on the wall and back of them are because the contractors had used low-grade concrete, I understand, to build that wall, which was the side of a building, and it had cracks, so the monsoon rains would wash in through the cracks and do damage. So they painted over the cracks and gave me these fractals to play with. And then, of course, it says blue sky, so you know everything's going to be all right. And somewhere elsewhere on that wall it says, "I do love you." And I thought, well, good, I do. And this is a picture of another Vietnam veteran, an Indian, a dear friend of mine who passed away April 2nd of last year. This is Rick Bartow.
Oh, yes, I know that, Rick. Great artist.
Great artist, and this was back in the early 90s. The regalia he's wearing is made of that, the mask is that monkey wood, or monkey pod salad bowl that everybody had to buy in the Navy Exchange. And the leggings were carved out of something else, a tiki or something, and the bells on his
ankles.
on his ankles are made of M16 cartridges.
Wow.
And he's standing between two of the sculptures. This is a fish trap, and that one over there, the curved ladder, represent the two ways people of his tribe move on to the next world.
What was his tribe?
Maidu, I believe, was he changed. He didn't know what it was for a while. He had it wrong, and I think the last he decided was Maidu. It was a California tribe. What a great guy. And that is another monument to Vietnam.
Wow.
Yeah.
I knew his artwork, but I didn't know he was. I didn't even know he was a veteran. Yeah.
He was a vet, and I realized years ago that we have all these negative experiences, these horrible things we carry around inside, and we can try to run away from them. A lot of vets become alcoholics or use drugs or whatever, or run away from it another way, just emotionally shut down. But you've got this powerful thing inside you. It is part of you, and there is nothing you can do about that. It is part of you. and what you do with it is up to you.
Right.
So I realized through reading Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese
yes.
Zen superstar,
Right.
primarily that the potential of what would be done with that was up to me. And so I have tried in the years of my retirement to do all the good I can, and to be judged by what I've done since 1971 instead of stopping there and judging myself and remaining in self-destructive mode.
Right.
It takes a while to figure that out, but maybe if we spread the word, somebody will figure it out before they do themselves a lot of damage, or their families.
It's so important. I mean, there's, 22 suicides a day from veterans, and increasingly women veterans, you know. We need to acknowledge that we, from Vietnam to now, actually from World War I, World War II, they just seem to follow one right after the other, and it's sad that we haven't been able to end these wars. There's also going to be, at the day after Memorial Day, we have a call out to all veterans to come to Washington, D.C., called Veterans on the March, and one of the things that we're going to be meeting at the Lincoln Memorial, and then from there we're going to read, I think they're going to have a number of speakers there. Chris Hedges is, I think, going to be there. I can't remember all the people that are going to be there. But one of the things is then they're going to, after there's a band going to be playing, and then after that there's going to be a march to the White House. And although our Commander-in-Chief is out of the country, we're trying to stop these endless wars.
Well, he's back.
Is he back?
Today, I think.
Is he? Okay. Yeah. Well, we hope that, one of the demands is that he speak with us, and I doubt, you remember Cindy Sheehan when she said, "What noble cause are we talking about?" and Bush wouldn't see him. Well, we expect the same kind of thing, but, it's least, like you said, we are broken in some ways, but at the same time we're trying to repair not just ourselves but the world at hand. And at the same time, our veterans' voice has so much power, and we have the opportunity to speak. Then we must, whenever we can, at least speak about, how do we, the people that you just did, these photographs talk about, when you look into the faces of those people, and we see what great human beings, we could all be friends in this world. We're running towards the end here. We've got about 5 minutes to go. So I wanted to just, thank you for being here and for sharing your story. I think these are the kind of stories that need to be shared with the rest of the world, so they know that people, like, again, if you're going to be out there and want to know more, if you're a veteran and you want to work on that, you contact Veterans for Peace, and we're at www.org. Veterans for Peace spelled out, and then org, and you can check that out, and then VietnamFullDisclosure.org. Spell it out. You can find that also on the Veterans for Peace website. Locally, we have a chapter here, Chapter 72, which will be up at the Oregon Vietnam Memorial, standing there respectfully with their flags as people go through the celebration, or I don't even like to call it a celebration, commemoration,
Yeah.
And one of the things that I want people to do is honor the dead, let's heal the wounded, but let's stop glorifying war. It's time that we start looking at no more monuments. We have young Iraq and Afghan veterans that are coming back, post-traumatic stress, and we have to, as elder veterans, we need to speak out so that their voices are carried, and they're doing a great job speaking out.
Yeah, I should say also, one of the things that I found very alienating when I tried to come back to the States was that I was told that we Vietnam veterans were not welcome in the VFW or the American Legion.
Right.
I thought, who cares? But also, that's not very nice.
No.
The American Legion at 21st and Alberta here in Portland has been transformed.
It has, hasn't it?
By Sean Davis and his crew of his female supervisor, Kelly, and
Damon Faust,
yeah,
all those guys,
yeah.
They're great.
Just an amazing place.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, they fed anybody who came in the door during the cold weather last winter.
Yeah.
They stood 18-hour watches. These are people with, Sean's a college teacher and firefighter and dad, and these are people with jobs, with stuff to do. Yeah. But they sacrificed, and they collected food, and they fed people, and they kept people alive.
Yeah, and they went to Haiti also and did work there.
Yep.
They came over to my house and helped clear some trees that fell down during that winter. You know, these are incredible young people, young veterans, who I have great respect for.
Yeah.
And like you said, that's changing the way it is. The younger people are reaching out in many different ways, and it's not, young people we have a lot of young people on our board now too, which is great. And before it was just a lot of old men from the Vietnam War, and now it's women veterans and speaking out, people of color speaking out. So I'm glad to see that, and people need to pay attention to what these young people are doing, pay great respect for them, and when they put that notice out there, try and get out there to their events, because they're doing tremendously wonderful things.
They are really saving lives.
They really are saving lives. You're exactly right, and I have great respect for them. Yeah. Any last word? A few minutes.
That war should only be the last measure when it is warranted, and it should be fully understood, and you cannot go fight in some other country where you do not understand the culture or the language or the symbolism or anything else.
Thank you, Joe. That is perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.